Hello, welcome to my post time-lapse wrap-up video. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the materials I used for this reproduction of a detail of Josie Morway's painting of a great blue heron, and then I'm going to talk about the techniques that I implemented as well. So I'll start with my mechanical pencils. So this is my HB mechanical pencil here. This is my 2B mechanical pencil, and this is my 4B mechanical pencil. So all my mechanical pencils are color coded. I also used a 2B wood pencil here. This is great for larger marks. So your mechanical pencils are great for lines, and something like this is better for much larger marks. And then I used this ebony pencil, which is like a 9B, so it's pretty soft, so if you're in one of my classes, you might not have something this dark, but like a 6B, you should have a 6B in your kit. So this is like what you'd use for your really dark areas there. All right, I also use my white plastic eraser, and this is another white plastic eraser that you saw me use. It's just really handy for coming in with some of those detailed areas, and you can kind of like shave off like parts of this to get really fine lines. If I really wanted to dig in there with some of those feathers, that's something I could have done with this. And if you don't have one of these, it's something you can do with this. You can take your big white plastic eraser and you could trim it into very fine points to get all those little details. If you're going to do that, use a knife. Don't use your scissors. If you try and use a pair of scissors, you're going to get a really jagged edge. So you just want a straight, like a big garden knife, butcher knife, I should say, and just cut right across it like that. So I used those, and I used this paper towel to tone the page, so to move the graphite around quite a bit. I used this blending stump to blend some of the smaller areas. And again, this is just for smaller areas. You wouldn't want to use a blending stump for like one of these big areas. You want to use something with a large surface area like this paper towel. Most of my classes, blending stump, it might not look exactly like this, but there's usually one in your kit. If not, you can take the paper towel and you can just roll it up like that to get a finer point, which is essentially what this is. It's just easier to hold. I also used this soft bristled acrylic brush to kind of do some softer blending in some of the areas. Again, that's something that you can do with a paper towel if need be, but I think these work a little bit better and they're more delicate, easier to hold. And then I also used my Hake brush quite a bit to clean things up. So, every time you come in with your eraser, you're going to get little bits and pieces on the paper. And if you don't clean those up and you try and draw over them, they can smear and leave marks everywhere. So it's good just to get in the habit of just every now and then brushing like that. I did not use my fingers at all anywhere for any blending other than to hold the blending implements. And that's the same reason that I'm wearing this hand sock, is because your hands have oils and sweat and coming out of them, and so you don't want that oil and sweat to seep into your paper. So you don't use your fingers. You use something like this or something like this, and you can use a sock like I did, or you can just put something down and work like this. So to keep your hand off the page. All right. So those are the materials. And when I started the video, what we had was a line drawing with the armature on there to check our proportions, and it was a volumetric planar drawing with some complex contour to map out the areas of light and shadow, and when that did not necessarily correspond with the planes of the subject. As I described in the first video, those two don't always line up, but typically you're going to see a strong correlation between the two. So I had everything mapped out, and so I began by erasing the armature, because everything was more or less where I wanted it. So all I had checked to make sure that my proportions were correct when it was easy to correct the drawing. And then I came in with my HB pencil and started filling things and building up my values from light to dark. I think it's important not to go too dark too fast, because value is all about relationships. Any single value by itself is, you can't really say it's correct or incorrect. You can only describe it in terms of its surrounding values, whether it is appropriately dark or lighter than the areas around it. So, I talk about the subjective nature of value, of the perception of value early on in this unit. So I lay down a bunch of graphite, and then I came in with this paper towel and I blended it out. I toned out the page. I moved that graphite all over the page to create kind of a thin layer of it. And if we were working in studio together, we probably would have used some powdered graphite to tone our pages from the beginning. But if you're working at home, which you probably are since you're watching this, you probably don't have access to powdered graphite. I would recommend picking some up, though it's increasingly harder to find if you really enjoy this drawing approach. But my favorite producer has ceased to produce it, so I'm still looking for a new supplier. All right, so I kind of smeared out the graphite, created a fine film layer, I should say, and then I began to come back in with my 2B and to kind of darken up some areas. So that was about the stage that this went from a closed form drawing to an open form drawing. Again, the difference being that with a closed form drawing, you have an outline. So there's just an outline, a visible outline around everything. And with an open form drawing, the edge of a subject between, foreground, background, positive space, negative space, it's not a line, it's just a shift in value. And that corresponds more to the way that we actually perceive the world around us. We don't see lines around everything. We just see shifts in value and color. So I then came back in with my eraser and began to pick out some of the lighter values in here, and I kind of went back and forth with going darker in some areas and going lighter in some areas. And again, that has a lot to do with finding the correct value relationships, local value relationships within an area. I came in with my 4B and started darkening these areas up. And you definitely, for something that's very detailed, and something that's very dark, you want a nice sharp point or fine points. That's where I like to use my mechanical pencil there. For these feathers, after I had established like some local value, I came in with this eraser and just started creating these very impressionistic marks to give you the impression of feathers and this this feathery texture that almost reads like fur. And it's not like I counted every single strand, to make sure I got all 47 or whatnot. I just said, I know there's a bunch of marks here that kind of look like this, and I know that the light source is over here, so it's going to be light on top of dark, and just followed those general rules. And then came back in with my graphite and made some marks beneath them and blended them and come back in and layered some more marks with my eraser here. And that's how I approached a lot of these very textured areas, is that very impressionistic approach. And I came in with this mist, this smoke, steam, the breath of the heron coming out there. I had toned this background here, and I came in with my eraser and made these very calligraphic marks. So I was kind of twisting my eraser to go from like a big mark to a thin mark back to a big mark, in a way that really mimicked the smoke or the vapor that we see in the original painting. So that's my post wrap up. Post wrap up, I guess. No, the picture that I'm going to post next will be my post wrap up. This is just my wrap up. So that's what I did with this drawing of Josie Morway's great blue heron. Yeah,